What if a single Ukrainian Su-27 could outthink an entire Russian air defense network, get hunted by hypersonic missiles, survive by meters, and still strike back? If you want more stories like this, subscribe. At exactly 10 a.m., the skies over occupied Kharkiv Oblast snapped from quiet to violent. A Russian S-400 battery fired. The missile punched through cloud and surged into a hypersonic kill corridor. Below it, a Ukrainian Su-27 screamed across the tree line in afterburner. In the cockpit, warning tones stacked into one continuous scream. The pilot didn't need to look twice. He'd been painted by one of the most lethal radars on Earth. This wasn't training. This was the real window where you live or don't. He didn't climb. He dove. The Su-27 knifed into a valley, so low that snow spray flicked up off the wings. Low altitude meant terrain masking. Hills block line of sight, and the radar horizon bends. It also meant no room for mistakes. One wrong correction, and the jet would meet the ground before any missile did. If he could slip under it, even briefly, the S-400's perfect math would be forced to guess. Behind him, the missile recomputed intercept geometry again and again. Its vapor trail carved the sky like a white comet. Then the horizon flashed. A fireball bloomed behind him, bright enough to flash through the cockpit and paint the instrument panel orange. The S-400 detonated because it lost the target. Shrapnel scattered into empty air and fell across frozen fields. Russian operators watched their track dissolve into nothing. In the cockpit, the pilot's hands trembled on the stick, not from panic, but from the realization that he should already be dead. The mission timer was still green. He was alive and still inbound. 30 seconds later, the warning tone returned, harsher and deeper. Another radar, another battery. Near Belgorod, a second S-400 division came online. A 40N6 missile launched, climbing to gain energy and angle. Proportional navigation updated constantly, trying to be where the Su-27 would be, not where it had been. The pilot refused the usual game. He stayed low, then slid behind a ridgeline that bent the radar horizon. The aircraft disappeared under the curve of the Earth by a fraction of a degree. From roughly 20 kilometers out, the seeker struggled. Lock weakened. For a few seconds, the weapon hunted probability instead of reality, and every second it searched burned fuel. The tone faded. Silence returned. Not safety, just a pause. Somewhere above the clouds, the missile was still burning through its remaining options, trying to reacquire a target that had slipped under the world. When the cockpit lit up again, it wasn't one threat. It was many, like lights turning on down a hallway. Russia wasn't firing blind anymore. They were building a cage. By 10:04 a.m., another S-400 division initiated launches without a clean track. No perfect lock, just patterns and timing fed by months of intercepted habits. Russian planners had noticed a repeat. JDAMER runs often needed altitude, speed, and a short stretch of stable flight to maximize glide. So they fired into that predictable window. Two missiles arced high above the clouds, pre-programmed to arrive where the Su-27 should appear. But this pilot broke the habit. Instead of climbing, he stayed under 600 feet, banking through folds in the terrain. The first missile detonated over nothing. The second burst into a white fireball that warmed only the stratosphere. The cage collapsed because the target refused to behave. It worked, but fuel was bleeding away with every low-level turn. The gauge fell faster than he wanted to admit. Down low, the jet burned extra fuel just to stay stable in rough air, and every ridge forced another bank. He checked the readout. About 2.4 tons remaining. Enough to finish the run, maybe. Enough to fight forever? No. Then a new tone punched into the cockpit. Sharper, faster, closer. S-300 tracking beam acquired. At 10:06 a.m., a hidden S-300 battery about 78 kilometers ahead woke up. Its radar swept in pencil-thin beams and caught a tiny, repeating pulse. His radar altimeter. The Su-27 had announced itself. Canisters opened. Missiles launched low and vicious. The pilot dumped chaff. Metallic strips burst behind the jet and spread into a shimmering cloud. One missile drifted toward the decoy. The next one stayed true. Range collapsed. 5 kilometers, 4, 3, and then barely 2. The pilot pulled hard. The jet snapped into a high G brake. Vision narrowed. The airframe groaned. The missile overshot by a sliver and slammed into a ridgeline, detonating into a wall of flame. The blast rattled the canopy. He survived again, but the maneuver broadcast his position. Within seconds, more radar spikes appeared. Additional S-300 sets flickering online. The net tightened. At 10:08 a.m., 3S-300 Battalion synchronized. Their radar fields overlapped so that when one beam lost him, another picked him up instantly. The threat display flooded with symbols as multiple operators tracked the same target from different angles. Then launches came in volume. Missiles rose from separate quadrants, one high to punish a climb, one low to punish a dive, another cutting across his projected line, and one chasing from behind to squeeze him into the center. Shockwaves rolled past the cockpit. The warning receiver layered tones until directions stopped mattering, so the pilot created chaos in their geometry. He slammed full afterburner and pitched up, not to escape, but to force guidance beams to cross. The Su-27 jumped upward in a violent, almost vertical burst, clawing from treetop height to several thousand feet in seconds. For a split second, the control picture degraded. Interference, angle conflicts, unstable solutions. Two missiles drifted offline. A third burned out below him. A fourth stayed locked and came closest. The tone sharpened into a single dominant howl. This one mattered more than the rest. The pilot rolled inverted and dove. The missile flashed past and detonated in open air, close enough to pepper the airframe and rattle the canopy. Warning lights flickered. The left engine showed heat instability. Wounded, but running. He was alive, but now he'd climbed into a sky where something else could see him. At 10:11 a.m., new signatures appeared. Fast, purposeful, not missiles. Two Russian Su-35 interceptors were closing from roughly 150 kilometers. Unlike ground batteries, they could reposition, chase, and keep pressure until the target ran out of fuel. Their radars swept wide arcs through thin air, hunting the damaged Su-27 that had briefly climbed into view. To them, it was a simple intercept problem: altitude, heading, closure rate. But to the Ukrainian pilot, it was a new kind of fear, because fighters can improvise. In one cockpit, a pilot selected an R-37M, long range and built to kill aircraft before they ever see the threat. It launched like a flare, accelerated hard, then settled into a cold approach. And time was exactly what the Ukrainian pilot no longer had, because his mission still required one thing he'd avoided all morning: altitude for JDAM release. The Su-27 began to climb again. Altitude ticked upward, 12,000, 18,000, 26,000 feet. Every 1,000 feet felt like stepping into a brighter spotlight. Fuel warnings flashed, hydraulics whined. Then the R-37M's seeker came alive. A new tone, steady, final. The missile had him. He had roughly 40 seconds. JDAM release needed almost all of it, so the pilot held level flight. No panic brake, no dive. Just a clean, stable line long enough to release and long enough to die. At the last usable window, he triggered the release. The JDAM dropped from the centerline pylon. Its wings snapped open into glide. Fast, mechanical, almost calm, like the bomb didn't care what was happening behind it. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. The seeker tone stayed steady. He could almost feel the missile closing, not as sound, but as pressure. Then the pilot rolled inverted and dove into a brutal brake, pulling as hard as his body could take. The R-37M tore past, so close the shockwave rattled the canopy and detonated overhead. Fragments hammered the air around him, hot specks and razor-sharp splinters that chewed at paint and metal. The jet shuddered, alarms flared, but both engines kept running. The pilot dropped into the clouds. Behind him, the JDAM glided, silent and unstoppable. By 10:15 a.m., the sky over the target area went eerily quiet. The Su-27, leaking fuel and trailing smoke, sank back below the radar horizon. Far behind, the JDAM reached its final coordinates and shifted into terminal correction. It struck the roof of a Russian command center at a steep angle, penetrated inside, and detonated deep within the structure. The guidance had done its job. Small corrections, last meter precision, no drama. Just a final, brutal line to the coordinates. Floors failed. Columns snapped. The building folded inward into a square crater of smoke and twisted steel. Nearby structures remained partially standing. Damage that looked less like anger and more like surgery. In Russian control rooms, operators realized too late what had happened. Their predictive cage, radars, missiles, algorithms had been undone by one pilot flying lower, later, and smarter than the math allowed. At 10:19 a.m., the Su-27 crossed back into friendly airspace. Fuel readout flashed low. Hydraulics complained. One engine ran hotter than the other, and the aircraft felt slightly unbalanced, like it was flying with a shoulder dipped. But it stayed in the air. Ground control confirmed the strike. Target erased. For a second, the radio stayed quiet, then a calm voice repeated the confirmation, like it was reading weather. No cheers, just breathing, steady, exhausted, human. Because sometimes victory isn't measured in how many missiles you fire, but in the seconds you survive when every law of physics says you shouldn't. If you were that pilot flying home on fumes with the sky burning behind you, what lesson would you carry from that day? Type it in the comments.